bit of audience participation. I'm going to play a sound effect, and if one of you lovely people after it plays could shout out what it's from or what sort of character it is, that'd be great. Hopefully this works. Oh, so good. Half-Life 2 Zombie. Thank you to whoever shouted that out. Yes, that is correct. And here's the little fella helping me hold up my quite long title. Looking adorable. The reason I've included that sound clip in this picture is to remind you of what those enemies sound and look like, because they're going to play a big part in my discussion of the nature of fear. Now, Half-Life 2 itself came out in 2004. It requires little introduction. It came out to great critical acclaim. Now, some context for me in 2004, I was 14, I was in my second year of secondary school, and here's an embarrassing picture of me from that time, the first truly terrifying thing this evening. Look at that haircut! That is awful! What's it doing? It's terrible. But another part of context for me from that time is I was very restricted in terms of the games I could buy. My parents were very strict in terms of age limits, so it meant my exposure to certain types of games was very limited. I had to sneak around to friends' houses to play lots of games of my age. So horror games were one thing I never played growing up. I never got to play Silent Hill, Resident Evil, anything like that. Half-Life 2 slipped under the radar because it was just after they'd introduced the PEGI system, and I got it at Woolworths, who didn't really care. So I got that, and it was great. So, of course, after buying that, got it home, installed it, and like so many other people, I was completely blown away from that initial train ride into City 17 and leaving the station, the canal boat chase where you're pursued by the helicopter gunship, and eventually, after that, you come to Black Mesa East, where you meet two of the main supporting characters of the game, Alex Vance and her father Eli. Now, after a little bit of exposition, Alex takes you on a tour of the base, and at a certain point, you come to this corridor. Now, as you can see, this corridor is quite dark, a bit dilapidated, there's some wreckage, and there's that big, imposing metal door at the far end. And it's at this point that Alex utters this line.
That's the old passage to Ravenholm. We don't go there anymore.
That's a bit loud, but yeah, you get the idea. Now, as I mentioned to you, I hadn't played any horror games, but I had watched a lot of horror television and horror films, parents and their wonderful double standards. So, I knew the tropes of the genre. I know whenever anyone says, that place is too creepy, we can't go there, or that thing is forbidden, we can't do that, you will always end up going to that place, or doing that thing. So, lo and behold, in Half-Life 2, the base is attacked, and you, Gordon Freeman, have to make your way to Ravenholm on your own. So, after prizing apart that big metal door, after a long ladder climb, you make your way to Ravenholm, and are greeted by this sight. Now, as you can see, the area is quite dilapidated. It's very dark and ominous. There's a very low synth rumbling playing in the sort of music score. At the very back middle of this screenshot, which you can kind of make out, there's a tree. There's half a body swinging from that tree, the lower half for some reason. And next to that tree is a shack. That shack is the way you progress from this introductory section into the rest of the level. You have to work your way towards that shack. Now, as you approach it, this fella jumps out. This point is the first time you're introduced to zombies in Half-Life 2 in a horror setting. And it was at this point that 14-year-old Gareth Monk switched off the game. I never got past Ravenholm when I had Half-Life 2 on PC. I never, ever got past it. Now, when you are 14, I would argue you have a lot of the hang-ups from fears you had when you were children. These physical, tangible fears, things that you can perceive and you know that could cause real, actual harm to you. Things like a noise in the dark might signal an intruder. These strange adults you've been told to avoid your entire childhood that might kidnap you. And if you're like me, spiders. I'm still scared of spiders. They're the worst. The great thing about these physical fears is that, more often than not, they're quite easy to resolve. If it's dark, you can turn a light on. If there's a spider, you can follow that spider back to its nest and you nuke the site from orbit, just to be sure. Games like Half-Life 2 work by preying upon that fear and reverting you back to that childhood state. They take power away from the player and take you back to that time in your life when all your decisions were made by adults and you really had no say in how you operated. Half-Life 2 does this by limiting the ammo you have in Ravenholm for your quite sizable arsenal at this point and asking you to use these more improvisational methods for dispatching enemies. More recently, games like Alien Isolation and Soma, both games that have been touched upon this evening, also utilise this method. They take power away from the player. Particularly Soma is a really good example because in Soma you have no way of fighting back. You can only run and hide from the enemies. Now all these games build up dread in different ways, but they all have that real physical enemy chasing you. So the zombies in Half-Life 2, the Alien Isolation, and in Soma it's those terrible, creepy, computer, horrible hybrid things. Now, we smash cut. The year is 2007. Gareth Monk is now 17 or 18 years of age. Here's another embarrassing picture of me from around that time. At this point, I thought it'd be best to point out some key elements that you can all laugh at, and for me, mistakes I should never make again. Now, at this time in my life, as you can tell from that facial expression, I'm still scared of lots of things. Spiders being one of them, but they're also very different from the fears I had in 2004. At 17 or 18, I'd argue pretty much most human beings are able to conceptualize abstract and existential notions of fear. So at this point in my life, I was thinking about sort of an undetermined future, losing these friends that I'd spent so long in a social group building up, what A-levels to take, or what university course to apply for, or should I go to university at all? It was also 2007 in which Half-Life 2 was re-released as part of the Orange Box collection and ported to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Now I saw this and I thought, right, this is it. I'm going to buy it, I'm going to overcome my fear, I'm going to beat it. And as cliche as it is to say, I actually did. I was of course absolutely terrified most of the time, as I still am when I play games like Alien Isolation and Soma now, but the satisfaction from those games comes from that thrill of overcoming those very real obstacles of fear, that endorphin rush you get from that fight or flight mechanism we have as human beings. Now, we smash cut to the year 2016. Now, here is another embarrassing picture of me. Hold your jokes, I am the one on the right. And, or if you want, you can just kind of look at the guy under the arrow. Now, 2016 has been a big year of change for me. I recently, in September of this year, dropped out of a PhD that I'd moved to Cardiff to study a year prior. So my fears now are, apart from spiders, very different from what they were, again, in 2007. I'm in a completely new place. For the first time, I'm outside of that warm, comforting embrace that is academia. So I don't know what I need or want to do with my life, and I'm unsure of where my future might go. So it's safe to say that at this point, my life is a bit of a mess, it's a little bit garbled. My life is quite strange at the moment. Which brings us to arguably the best segue in this entire talk. Thank you. I've been playing Life is Strange. Now, for those of you who haven't played it, Life is Strange, you play as Max Caulfield. She's a 17-year-old student who's just recently moved away from her parents' home to study at private arts boarding school. Now, upon playing this, I was hit with a wave of emotions and memories that will ring true with anyone who's ever moved away from home, but particularly those of us who have moved away to study education. The key beats that Life is Strange hits include the forming of new friendship groups, establishing that new identity in a new context, and of course taking those first tentative steps into adulthood where you will begin to establish yourself as a human being. Now, Life is Strange as a game plays very similarly to what people call the Telltale format. It's a third-person adventure game with light point-and-click elements interspersed with key decisions at points in the narrative. Life is Strange, however, differs from the Telltale format in two key ways. The first is that the majority of your decisions are more based around how your actions will affect your interpersonal relationships with other characters, rather than simply who lives and who dies. The other change, the other difference, is that you, Max Caulfield, within the first 15 minutes of the game, so this isn't a spoiler, it's very early on, you're given the power to rewind time. Shocking, I know. Now, as a player, this really empowers you. Unlike a Telltale game, you're able to see both sides of that decision-making coin. You can explore all branches open to you, and there are really no ramifications. Life is Strange itself isn't a traditionally scary game. There aren't any monsters chasing you, you're not trapped in an abandoned asylum or hospital. But there is some genuinely disturbing and frightening content. Now, for me, one of the key scary moments came when the game gives you this empowerment, gives you this ability to manipulate time, and then pulls the rug out from under you and completely takes that away. Towards the end of the game, I'm going to try and keep this very vague because it's a really good game, you are temporarily left without the ability to rewind time as Max. Now, it's at this point that the game confronts you with pretty much every decision you've made up to that point, speaking directly to Max. It calls her selfish and self-obsessed for using these potentially world-changing powers to merely manipulate people in her life and make herself look cool. It's almost like it's speaking to the player as well. Are you selfish and self-obsessed for taking these powers and merely using them to alter a digital avatar's perception of you? The game after this builds to a final climactic decision. And you're unable to use your powers to see both sides of this. You have to make this on gut instinct alone. And it's this that brings me to the heart of what scares me about Life is Strange, what frightens me the most. It's the fear of the unknown, of damaging or losing these interpersonal relationships I've spent so long building up. And the fact that a lot of my life to this point has now led me questioning all the decisions I've made up to now. Going back to games like Soma and Half-Life 2, these games are akin to walking through a digital haunted house. You're very much fearing for your digital life. You're expecting, as we've discussed more than once this evening, things to jump out at you and pounce upon you. Life is Strange asks you to consider these more existential, abstract notions of fear, and it does this through its design. The game is played in third person. So, for example, you're not looking through the eyes of Gordon Freeman. You're looking in a removed perspective. The character Max herself is very well written and well developed, apart from the absolutely terrible teenage dialogue that's used throughout the game. The game itself, the setting is not particularly scary. It's in a small coastal fishing town in America. And the very idea of manipulating space and time is quite an abstract and weird thing in itself. As a player, you hold down one button, Max kind of waves a hand in front of her face, and things go back. There's no gunshot, there's no console pressed. It just happens. Excuse me. Now, I think it's incredible that Life is Strange can scare me now as much as Half-Life 2 did back in 2004 when I was 14 years old with that terrible haircut. And I think it's really important that we play games that scare us and challenge us and do unsettle us in some ways, and that it's really great that games can do this now without being labelled as traditional horror games. Now, I'd love to say that I could end this talk on a positive note. I realise it's been a bit of a downer of a talk. I'd love to say something like, oh, well, Life is Strange helped me conquer all my fears and everything's great now. But that'd be really cheesy, really cliche, and a bit of a lie. But Life is Strange did at least help me to acknowledge a lot of those fears I wasn't comfortable accepting before I played it. And I hope in 5 years from now, I can look back on 2016, marvel at what a game Life is Strange is, like I did with Half-Life 2, and look at how stupid those are the things I was scared of then in comparison to now. But it's important to remember that I will always be scared of one thing: spiders. Developers, stop putting spiders in games. Thank you very much.